Black mechanic finds stray dog during blackout. Together they save wildlife clinic. The howling wind tore through the abandoned building as Raymond Jenkins pressed his back against the wall, clutching the trembling dog to his chest. Water seeped through the ceiling, dripping onto expensive medical equipment. Outside, the hurricane's rage intensified, sending debris crashing against the windows. "Easy, Scout," Raymond whispered to the German shepherd mix. "We're gonna make it through this." A crash from above sent plaster raining down. The frightened whimpers of animals echoed from the back room, injured wildlife trapped in their cages with no way out. Dr. Eleanor Whitfield, her silver hair plastered to her forehead, frantically tried to move a fallen shelf blocking their only exit. "Raymond, the water's rising too fast," she called over the storm's roar. "We can't save them all." Raymond looked down at Scout, then at the framed photo that had fallen from the wall, a young Eleanor with her late husband on the day they'd opened this clinic 30 years ago. The building that had served thousands of animals over the decades was minutes from being washed away. "Yes, we can," Raymond said, setting Scout down and removing his soaked jacket. "My father didn't raise a man who gives up, and I promised you, Doc." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears as Raymond waded toward the blocked doorway, water now at his knees. Scout barked once and followed, undeterred by the rising flood. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Raymond was closing up Jenkins' auto repair on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Raymond Jenkins wiped grease from his weathered hands with a rag that had seen better days. At 58, his once black beard now peppered with gray, he felt every one of those years in his knees as he lowered the hood on Mrs. Abernathy's Buick. The radio crackled with warnings about an unexpected hurricane veering toward the coast, but the skies above Millwood had only just begun to darken. "You'll be good for another few thousand miles, Mrs. A," Raymond said, handing the elderly woman her keys. "Thank you, Raymond," she replied, her voice warm with familiarity born of 20 years as a customer. "Your father would be proud of how you've kept this place going. Will you be closing up before the storm hits?" Raymond glanced at the darkening horizon. "Just as soon as I finish Mr. Peterson's transmission. You get home safe now." As Mrs. Abernathy drove away, Raymond turned the radio volume up. The weatherman's voice grew increasingly urgent, warning of potential flooding in low-lying areas. The wildlife clinic on the edge of town was mentioned specifically as being in the path of potential flash floods. "That's Eleanor's place," Raymond muttered to himself, thinking of Dr. Eleanor Whitfield, the veterinarian who had treated his late wife's beloved cat with such kindness during its final days 3 years ago. Their paths crossed occasionally at the diner or the hardware store, exchanging polite but distant greetings. Millwood wasn't a big town, after all. Raymond was tightening the last bolt on Mr. Peterson's Dodge when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The sudden silence as the radio died and the overhead fans stopped was eerie. Outside, the wind had picked up considerably, bending the old oak tree in the lot almost sideways. "Guess that's my cue," Raymond said to no one in particular, reaching for the flashlight he kept in his toolbox. Mike shouted over the storm. "You need to evacuate now." "Dams got a breach. We're looking at major flooding in the next hour." "Where's Dr. Whitfield?" Raymond asked. "She took a load of animals to the community center but never came back." Mike's expression grew grim. "Road to the center's washed out completely. Tree came down, took a power line with it. Nobody's getting through that way now." Raymond felt his stomach drop. "Is there another route?" "Only the old fire road that runs behind the Peterson farm, but it'll be mud soup by now," Mike replied. "Listen, I've got 3 more places to warn. Can you get these animals out? The evacuation point has changed to the high school on Ridgeline Drive." "I'll handle it," Raymond assured him, "but I need to find Eleanor first." Mike nodded. "Be careful. This storm's turned nasty faster than anyone predicted." He turned to go, then added, "Your dad would be proud, Ray. He was always the first to help in a crisis, too." As Mike's cruiser pulled away, Raymond turned to Scout. "Looks like we've got a change of plans, boy." Raymond quickly finished loading the remaining animals into the clinic van. The fox with the broken leg snarled from its crate, frightened by the thunder that now crashed overhead with increasing frequency. The owl remained stoically silent, its unblinking eyes following Raymond's every move. "That's everyone," Raymond said to Scout, closing the van's rear doors. "Now we need to find Eleanor." Scout barked once, as if in agreement, then suddenly stiffened, ears perked toward the clinic's front entrance. A moment later, Raymond heard it too, the faint sound of a car engine struggling, then dying. Raymond and Scout splashed through the deepening water around the building to find Eleanor's station wagon stalled in what was now nearly 3 feet of water at the clinic's entrance. Eleanor was still behind the wheel, trying desperately to restart the flooded engine. Eleanor. Raymond called, wading toward her. She rolled down the window, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. The road's gone, Raymond. I couldn't get through to the community center. I barely made it back here. Mike just told me. They've changed the evacuation point to the high school, Raymond explained, reaching her car. The engine's flooded. You'll have to leave it. Eleanor nodded, gathering her purse and medical bag. When Raymond opened her door, the water rushed in, soaking the car's interior. Eleanor gasped as the cold water reached her waist, but Raymond steadied her with a strong hand. I've got the van running, he said. We can take all the animals in one trip. Thank God, Eleanor breathed, clutching her bag to her chest to keep it dry. I was afraid I'd lost everything. They waded back to the garage where the van waited, Scout leading the way as if he'd appointed himself their guide. Once inside, Eleanor sank into the passenger seat, shivering despite the humid air. There are emergency blankets in that cabinet, she said, pointing. We should wrap the fawns. They're still too young to regulate their body temperature properly. Raymond retrieved the blankets, noting how Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for them. When did you last eat something? Eleanor blinked, seeming confused by the question. I had coffee this morning, maybe a granola bar at lunch. Raymond rummaged through his tool bag and produced a slightly squashed peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Margaret always made me pack extra food. Old habits die hard. Eat this while I check on the animals one last time. Eleanor accepted the sandwich with a grateful nod. Margaret was your wife, the one with the beautiful Maine Coon cat? Yes, Raymond said, surprised she remembered. She's been gone 3 years now. I remember her, Eleanor said softly. She brought treats for every animal in the boarding area whenever she came in, said no one should feel forgotten. Raymond felt the familiar ache that came with memories of Margaret, but it was gentler now, warmed by Eleanor's remembrance. That sounds like her. A tremendous crash from inside the clinic interrupted the moment. Raymond rushed inside with Scout at his heels to find that the rising water had toppled a storage shelf, sending supplies floating across the treatment room floor. We need to go now, Raymond called to Eleanor. Water's coming in fast. Eleanor joined him, grabbing a few floating medications and a waterproof case of records. My husband built this place 30 years ago, she said, her voice catching. Every animal that comes through those doors I treat like they were his. Raymond helped her gather the last essential items. Your husband would want you safe, Eleanor. Buildings can be rebuilt. Eleanor nodded, though her eyes lingered on the framed photos on the wall herself and a tall, kind-faced man in their younger days, surrounded by animals of all kinds. Raymond carefully took down the largest photo and handed it to her. This one at least, he said. They made their way to the van, Eleanor clutching the photo to her chest. Scout jumped in the back near the animal crates, seemingly intent on keeping watch over their charges. Raymond started the engine, relieved when it turned over smoothly. The fire road behind Peterson's farm is our only way out now, Raymond explained, carefully backing the van out of the garage. It'll be rough going. Eleanor braced herself against the dashboard. I trust you're driving, Raymond. The van's headlights cut through the sheeting rain as Raymond navigated the flooded parking lot. The water had risen alarmingly in just the short time they'd been loading the van, now reaching halfway up the tires. The van lurched as Raymond found the access road, the wheels spinning momentarily before finding purchase. Tell me about Scout, Eleanor said, clearly trying to distract herself from their precarious situation. He seems remarkably well-adjusted for a stray. Raymond glanced at Scout in the rearview mirror. The dog sat alertly among the animal crates, occasionally sniffing at them with gentle interest. Found him behind my garage just before I called you. No collar, but he's too well-mannered to have been on his own long. Someone trained him well. He reminds me of a service dog I treated last year, Eleanor observed. Same attentive posture, same way of making eye contact. Could be, Raymond agreed, carefully steering around a fallen branch. Margaret always wanted a dog, but with Smokey being so territorial, we never got one. Funny how things work out. The fire road wound through dense woods behind the Peterson farm, normally a well-maintained dirt track used by the volunteer fire department for accessing remote areas. Tonight, it was a treacherous ribbon of mud that threatened to swallow the van's tires with each yard gained. Raymond drove with intense concentration, hands gripping the wheel tightly. I saw your name in the paper last month, Eleanor said conversationally, though her white knuckles on the armrest betrayed her nervousness. You fixed the school bus fleet for free when the district's budget was cut. Raymond shrugged, embarrassed. Those buses needed work and the kids needed to get to school. Simple as that. Not simple at all, Eleanor countered. That's the problem with small towns. Everyone knows your business, but they don't always recognize your worth. Raymond was saved from responding by a sudden jolt as the van hit a deep rut. The animals in back voiced their disapproval with a chorus of barks, squawks, and hisses. Scout moved among the crates, pressing his nose to each one as if offering reassurance. That dog is something special, Eleanor commented. He is, Raymond agreed, then frowned as the van's headlights illuminated what lay ahead. A section of the fire road completely washed away, leaving a churning gap of muddy water where the path should have been. Can we make it across? Eleanor asked, leaning forward to peer through the rain-streaked windshield. Raymond studied the obstacle. The gap wasn't wide, maybe 15 feet, but it was impossible to tell how deep the water ran or if the road's surface remained underneath. We have to try, he decided. Going back isn't an option. Eleanor nodded grimly. The animals can't stay in these crates indefinitely. Some need medication soon. Raymond put the van in its lowest gear. Hold on tight. The van lurched forward, picking up speed before hitting the water. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they would make it through, but halfway across, the front wheels sank suddenly. The engine sputtered as water reached the undercarriage. No, 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 Raymond muttered, pumping the gas pedal. The wheels spun uselessly as the van settled deeper into the washed-out section. Scout barked anxiously from the back. The animals sensed the danger, their distress evident in increased movement and vocalizations. We're stuck, Raymond admitted, turning off the engine to prevent further damage. And I think we're still sinking. Eleanor's face was pale in the dim light of the dashboard. What do we do? Raymond thought quickly. The Peterson barn is about half a mile through those woods. If we can get the animals there, they'll be above the flood line until help can reach us. Half a mile through that? Eleanor gestured at the pitch-black forest being lashed by wind and rain. I've got a flashlight, Raymond said with more confidence than he felt. And Scout seems to have good instincts. As if understanding his name, Scout barked once from the back of the van. We don't have much choice, Raymond continued. That water's still rising. Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. You're right, let's work fast. They reorganized the crates, consolidating where possible to reduce the number they'd need to carry. The smaller animals, rabbits and squirrels, were placed in Eleanor's medical bag, lined with towels for warmth. The fawns would have to walk, as would the dogs being boarded. The cats were placed in a single carrier that Eleanor would manage. Raymond would take the hawks and owl, while the fox with the broken leg presented the biggest challenge. He's sedated but still semi-wild, Eleanor warned as they prepared to exit the van. He could bolt if he feels threatened. Raymond nodded, securing the fox's carrier with extra straps. I'll keep him close. The moment they opened the van doors, the full force of the storm hit them. Rain drove horizontally into their faces, and the wind nearly knocked Eleanor off her feet. Scout jumped down first, shaking off the water that immediately soaked his coat. The boarded dogs followed, leashed together and whimpering at the weather's fury. Stay close to me, Raymond shouted over the wind, helping Eleanor down with her burden of carriers. The fawns balked at first, frightened by the storm, but with gentle coaxing from Eleanor, they finally stepped into the tempest, their spindly legs trembling. The small procession set off into the woods, Raymond leading with his flashlight, Scout trotting confidently at his side as if he knew exactly where they were heading. The half-mile journey felt like an eternity. Twice they had to detour around fallen trees. The mud sucked at their shoes, threatening to pull them off with each step. Eleanor stumbled once, nearly dropping the cat carrier, but Raymond's steady hand caught her elbow. Almost there, he encouraged, though in truth he was beginning to wonder if they'd veered off course in the darkness. Scout suddenly barked and bounded ahead, disappearing into the gloom. Scout! Raymond called, alarmed. A moment later, the dog reappeared, barking insistently and running back the way he'd gone, clearly wanting them to follow. I think he's found something, Raymond said. They followed Scout through a dense patch of underbrush that scratched at their faces and pulled at their clothes. Then suddenly the trees opened up, and the hulking shape of the Peterson barn loomed before them, its weathered sides creaking in the wind. Thank God! Eleanor breathed, hurrying forward with renewed energy. The barn door was secured with a simple latch that Raymond easily lifted. Inside, it was dry and smelled of hay and old wood. Raymond's flashlight revealed a spacious interior with stalls along one side and a hayloft above. This is perfect, Eleanor said, immediately setting down her burdens and beginning to organize a space for the animals. The Petersons haven't kept livestock in years, but this is still in good shape. Raymond brought in the remaining carriers, closing the door firmly against the howling wind. Scout shook himself vigorously, then immediately began inspecting their new shelter, nose to the ground. "Let me help you get everyone settled," Raymond offered, watching as Eleanor efficiently began transferring animals to makeshift enclosures created from empty stalls. They worked together, creating safe spaces for each animal. The hawks and owl were placed in separate stalls with doors secured by rope. The fox, still groggy from sedation, was carefully transferred to a stall with the lower half of the door closed to prevent escape. The fawns seemed content to bed down in fresh hay, while the boarded dogs explored their new temporary home with cautious curiosity. "We should try to reach someone, let them know where we are," Eleanor said once all the animals were settled. Raymond checked his phone. "No service. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. The Petersons' farmhouse is another quarter-mile that way," Eleanor said, pointing. "But with the flooding, we're better off staying put," Raymond concluded. "Mike knows we were heading this way. When the storm lets up, they'll come looking." Eleanor nodded, suddenly swaying on her feet. Raymond caught her arm to steady her. "When did you last sleep?" he asked. "I was up all night with the fox surgery," she admitted. "Then the storm warnings started and—" "You need rest," Raymond said firmly. "I'll keep watch." Eleanor didn't argue, allowing Raymond to guide her to a clean pile of hay along the barn's inner wall. She sat down heavily, the adrenaline that had kept her going clearly ebbing. "Thank you, Raymond," she said quietly. "I couldn't have saved them without you." Raymond smiled. "Get some sleep, Doc. Scout and I will stand guard." Eleanor's eyes were already closing as she lay back in the hay. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Raymond made one more circuit of the barn, checking on each animal and ensuring the doors were secure against the storm. Scout followed, occasionally nudging Raymond's hand with his nose as if offering encouragement. "You're something else, you know that?" Raymond murmured to the dog. "Just showed up when you were needed most." Scout wagged his tail and settled beside Raymond as he sat down near the barn door, his back against a wooden post. Through a crack in the doorway, Raymond could see the storm still raging, trees bending almost double in the wind. The sound of water rushing somewhere nearby suggested the flooding was worsening. Raymond thought about his shop, probably underwater by now. About the home he'd shared with Margaret, sitting empty on higher ground. About how quickly life could change course, just like the creek that now raged beyond its banks. Scout's head came to rest on Raymond's knee, the dog's brown eyes gazing up at him with what seemed like understanding. "Guess we both needed somewhere to be tonight, huh, boy?" Raymond said softly, running his hand over Scout's damp fur. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of abating. Occasionally, an animal would stir, and Raymond would check on it, guided by Eleanor's earlier instructions. The fox had begun to wake from sedation, watching Raymond warily from its stall. The hawks remained regally aloof, while the fawns slept curled together like oversized puppies. Raymond dozed fitfully, waking at every significant change in the storm's sound. Sometime near what he guessed was midnight, he noticed water beginning to seep under the barn door. "That's not good," he muttered, standing to investigate. The water wasn't deep, just a thin sheet making its way across the barn floor, but its presence suggested the flooding had reached the barn's slight elevation. If it continued to rise. Raymond carefully stepped over Eleanor's sleeping form to check the back of the barn. There, a small door led to a slight incline behind the structure. Opening it, Raymond saw that the ground rose sharply about 50 yards beyond, leading to a rocky outcropping that would be well above any flood. Scout appeared beside him, sniffing at the rain still pouring down. "If the water keeps rising, that's our exit strategy," Raymond told the dog, who cocked his head as if considering the plan. A soft sound made Raymond turn. Eleanor was sitting up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "How long was I out?" she asked, voice husky with sleep. "Few hours," Raymond answered. "How do you feel?" "Better," she admitted, then noticed the water glistening on the barn floor. "Oh no, it's just starting to come in," Raymond assured her. "But we should be prepared to move again if necessary." Eleanor nodded, immediately standing to check on her patients. "The animals can't handle another trek through the storm, especially not the ones recovering from surgery." Raymond showed her the back door and the higher ground beyond. "If it comes to it, we can make it up there. It's not far." They checked each animal together, Eleanor making minor adjustments to bandages and administering medications she'd brought in her waterproof bag. The fox was fully awake now, regarding them with alert yellow eyes but showing no sign of aggression. "He's doing remarkably well," Eleanor commented. "Wild animals usually panic in these situations." "Maybe he knows we're trying to help," Raymond suggested. Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her tired face. "You sound like my husband, James. He always believed animals understood more than we give them credit for." Raymond leaned against the stall door. "Tell me about him." Eleanor's smile turned wistful. James was a wildlife biologist. We met in college. I was studying veterinary medicine, and he was already doing field work with endangered species. He convinced me to specialize in wildlife rather than domestic pets. Said there were plenty of vets for cats and dogs, but not enough for the wild ones who needed just as much help. Sounds like a wise man, Raymond said. He was, Eleanor agreed. We moved here in '83 and converted that old building into the clinic. Everyone thought we were crazy, a wildlife rehabilitation center in a small town. But James said, wild creatures don't observe city limits, Ellie. They need help wherever they are. When did you lose him? Raymond asked gently. 10 years ago, heart attack while tracking a wounded eagle. He died doing what he loved, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the sadness in her eyes. I've run the clinic alone since then. It gets harder every year with funding cuts and increasing costs, but I can't imagine doing anything else. Raymond nodded, understanding completely. My father opened Jenkins Auto in 1965. I grew up in that garage, learning every engine part before I could drive. When he passed, there was never any question I'd keep it going. Even though cars have changed so much since then? Eleanor asked. Especially because of that, Raymond said. Someone needs to know how to fix things that were built to last, not just replace parts in disposable machines. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden increase in the water's flow under the door. What had been a trickle was now a steady stream spreading across the barn floor. That's happening too fast, Raymond said with concern, watching as the water reached the first stall where the smallest creatures were housed. Eleanor immediately began moving rabbits and squirrels to higher platforms she created from empty crates. Raymond helped, lifting the heavier carriers to safer positions. Scout paced anxiously, occasionally pausing to sniff at the advancing water. Within 30 minutes, the water had risen to ankle depth throughout the barn. Rain continued to hammer on the roof, and the wind howled through every crack in the old building's walls. We need to move to higher ground now, Raymond decided, seeing how the water continued to rise steadily. Before it gets too deep to safely transport everyone. Eleanor agreed, though her face showed her concern. The fawns can walk and the boarding dogs too, but the birds of prey and the fox. I'll make multiple trips if necessary, Raymond assured her. They worked quickly, preparing for their second evacuation of the night. Eleanor fashioned a sling from her jacket to carry the smallest animals. The cats in their carrier could be managed by Raymond on the first trip, along with the hawks. The second trip would bring the fox and owl. Scout, stay with Eleanor, Raymond instructed as they prepared to leave through the back door. The rain hit them like a physical blow as they stepped outside. The ground behind the barn had become a shallow river flowing down from higher ground, making footing treacherous. Eleanor led the fawns by gentle tugs on makeshift leads fashioned from medical gauze, while the boarded dogs splashed reluctantly behind her. Raymond followed with his burden of carriers, Scout ranging ahead as if scouting their path. The rocky outcropping loomed before them, a darker shadow against the night sky. Its lower reaches were already surrounded by swirling water. We need to move quickly. Raymond called over the storm's roar. That water's rising fast. They pushed forward, fighting against the wind and the increasingly powerful flow of water around their legs. The fawns struggled, their slender legs barely keeping them upright in the current. One of the boarded dogs, a small terrier, yelped as it lost its footing and began to be swept away. Scout reacted instantly, plunging into the deeper water and gently catching the small dog by its collar, guiding it back toward Eleanor. Good boy, Scout, Eleanor called, securing the terrier more firmly to its makeshift leash. They reached the base of the rocky incline where the flooding was deepest. What should have been a gentle slope had become a rushing stream over slick stone. Raymond set down his carriers on a relatively dry patch and turned to help Eleanor with the fawns, which were now trembling violently from fear and cold. I'll carry them up one at a time, Raymond decided, gently lifting the smaller of the two fawns into his arms. The young deer weighed more than he expected, but Raymond's years of lifting engine blocks had built considerable strength. Eleanor nodded, keeping a firm hold on the remaining animals. Be careful on those rocks. Raymond made his way carefully up the slope, feeling for secure footing with each step. The fawn in his arms remained surprisingly still, as if sensing the importance of not struggling. At the top of the outcropping, a small plateau offered shelter beneath an overhanging ledge. Raymond set the fawn down in this relative sanctuary before returning for the next animal. One by one, he transported their menagerie to safety, first the animals, then the carriers containing the smaller creatures. Scout helped herd the boarding dogs, showing remarkable patience with the frightened animals. Only the fox and owl remained back at the barn, waiting for Raymond's return trip. I'll go with you, Eleanor insisted when Raymond prepared to head back. You're exhausted, Raymond countered. Stay with the animals. Some of them need your attention more than I do. Eleanor looked like she might argue further, but a plaintive bleat from one of the fawns drew her attention. Be careful, Raymond. That water's still rising. Raymond nodded, gesturing to Scout. Come on, boy, one more trip. Scout barked once and followed Raymond back down the slope. The return to the barn was even more difficult as they were now fighting against the current. The water had risen to mid-calf, and its force threatened to sweep Raymond's feet from under him with each step. The barn came into view, water now flowing freely through its open doors. Raymond waded inside to find the interior transformed into a shallow lake, with only the highest stalls still above water. The owl watched Raymond's approach with its unchanging stare, seemingly unperturbed by the disaster unfolding around it. The fox, however, was another matter. Fully awake and alarmed by the rising water, it paced its stall, favoring its splinted leg but moving with surprising agility. Easy now, Raymond soothed, approaching the fox's stall with caution. We're going somewhere safer. The fox backed away, baring its teeth slightly. Scout whined from the doorway, drawing the fox's attention. To Raymond's surprise, the wild animal seemed to calm somewhat at the dog's presence. That's right, Raymond continued in the same gentle tone. Nobody's going to hurt you. With careful movements, Raymond secured the fox's carrier and prepared it for transport. The owl was easier, allowing itself to be transferred to its travel container with minimal fuss. Raymond gathered both carriers and turned to leave, Scout leading the way. The scene outside the barn had worsened dramatically in the short time they'd been inside. The water now rushed in a torrent between the barn and the rocky outcropping, carrying debris, branches, parts of fences, even what looked like a mailbox in its churning flow. This is bad, Raymond muttered, setting down the carriers to assess their options. The direct route they'd taken earlier was now impassable, the water too deep and fast-flowing. Raymond looked right and left, seeking an alternative path. To their right, the ground rose slightly before meeting the outcropping, creating a longer but potentially safer route. That way, Scout, Raymond indicated, picking up the carriers again. They made slow progress along this new path, the carriers growing heavier with each step. The fox shifted restlessly in its container while the owl maintained its dignified silence. Scout stayed close to Raymond's side, occasionally pushing against his leg when Raymond's footing seemed uncertain. They were halfway to the outcropping when disaster struck. A massive branch carried by the floodwaters slammed into Raymond's legs from behind. He stumbled, losing his grip on the fox's carrier, which tumbled into the swirling water. No, Raymond shouted, lunging for the carrier as it began to be swept away. Scout was faster. The dog plunged into the deeper water, swimming powerfully after the floating container. Raymond could only watch, heart in his throat, as Scout caught up to the carrier and gripped it with his teeth, struggling to keep both himself and his burden above water. Scout, this way, Raymond called, setting down the owl's carrier on the highest ground he could find and wading into the flood to help. The current pulled strongly at Raymond's legs as he pushed deeper into the flow. Scout was swimming toward him, making painfully slow progress against the rushing water. The fox's carrier was half submerged, but Scout held it determinedly above the surface. Raymond extended his arms, reaching for Scout and his precious cargo. Their fingers briefly touched Scout's fur before another surge pushed the dog just beyond reach. Come on, boy, you can do it, Raymond encouraged, pushing even deeper into the dangerous current. Scout made one final effort, lunging forward with the last of his strength. Raymond's hands closed around the carrier's handle, and he pulled both it and Scout toward him with a mighty heave. The carrier came free of the water, the fox inside soaked but apparently unharmed, yipping with distress. Scout paddled beside Raymond, clearly exhausted but still fighting the current. I've got you, Raymond assured the dog, wrapping one arm around Scout's body while holding the carrier with his other hand. Together, they struggled back to where the owl waited, somehow still serene amid the chaos. Raymond gathered both carriers, supporting Scout with his leg when the dog seemed ready to collapse from exhaustion. Just a little further, Raymond encouraged, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Scout or himself. The outcropping loomed before them, Eleanor's silhouette visible at its peak. She had seen their predicament and was making her way down to help, negotiating the slippery rocks with determination. Raymond, she called, reaching the bottom of the slope and extending her hands to take one of the carriers. With Eleanor's help, they managed the final leg of their journey, climbing the rocky slope with the last of their charges. Scout followed, dragging himself up through sheer force of will. They reached the sheltered plateau where the other animals waited, all seemingly comfortable in their makeshift accommodations. Raymond set down his burden and immediately knelt beside Scout, checking the exhausted dog for injuries. "He saved the fox," Raymond explained to Eleanor, running his hands gently over Scout's trembling body. "Jumped right into the flood after the carrier." Eleanor knelt beside them, her experienced hands joining Raymond's examination. "No obvious injuries, but he's exhausted and chilled. We need to warm him up." She removed her veterinary coat, somehow still relatively dry, and wrapped it around Scout's wet fur. The dog looked up at them with tired eyes but managed to thump his tail weakly against the ground. "Brave boy," Eleanor murmured, stroking Scout's head. "Very brave boy." Raymond checked on the fox, relieved to find it alert and seemingly unharmed by its dunking. Its splinted leg remained secure, and though the animal was wet and frightened, it showed no signs of additional distress. "Everyone made it," Raymond said with quiet triumph, surveying their unlikely menagerie huddled under the rock ledge. Eleanor sat beside him, her shoulder touching his in the confined space. "Thanks to you and Scout. We make a good team," Raymond replied, including both Eleanor and Scout in his glance. Eleanor smiled tiredly. "Yes, we do." They fell into companionable silence, listening to the storm rage around their small sanctuary. The rock overhang protected them from the worst of the rain, and the elevation kept them safely above the rising floodwaters. Scout dozed between them, his breathing growing steadier as he warmed up. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said after a while, her voice barely audible above the storm. "The clinic will need rebuilding after this." Raymond nodded. "I suspect my shop too, first floor at least." "Maybe it's time to make some changes," Eleanor continued. "The clinic building was never ideal, too close to the creek, too small for the work we do now." "What are you thinking?" Raymond asked. Eleanor looked at him directly. "There's that vacant lot next to your garage on higher ground. I've always thought it would be perfect for a new clinic. Better access for people bringing in injured wildlife, more visibility to attract donors and volunteers." Raymond considered this. "The Matthews property, it's been for sale for years." "I could never afford it on my own," Eleanor admitted. "But maybe a partnership of sorts?" Raymond raised an eyebrow. "A partnership?" "Your garage, my clinic, side by side but connected," Eleanor explained, warming to her idea. "You could expand your business too, that classic car restoration work you've talked about doing but never had the space for." Raymond was silent for a moment, turning the idea over in his mind. It was appealing, not just the business aspect, but the thought of working near Eleanor each day, of building something new together from the ruins of the flood. "Drive each other crazy," he said finally, but there was a smile in his voice. Eleanor chuckled. "Probably, but in a good way, I think." Scout stirred between them, lifting his head to look from one to the other as if following their conversation. "And what about you, Scout?" Raymond asked the dog. "Where do you fit in this grand plan?" Scout's tail thumped against the ground, his one floppy ear tilting comically. "Clinic mascot," Eleanor suggested. "Or garage security. How about just family?" Raymond said softly. Eleanor's eyes met his, something warm and understanding passing between them. "Family works." The storm continued through the night, but within their rocky shelter, a different kind of weather was changing, the long winter of solitude that had followed both their losses giving way to the first tentative warmth of spring. Dawn broke with unexpected swiftness, the storm clouds parting to reveal a sky washed clean of all but the palest blue. The floodwaters had begun to recede, leaving a transformed landscape of mud and debris below their rocky perch. Eleanor tended to her animal patients, checking bandages and administering medications from her dwindling supply. The fox, perhaps the most miraculous patient of all, seemed stronger this morning, watching Eleanor's ministrations with alert yellow eyes. "His leg is healing well," she told Raymond. "Wild animals have an extraordinary capacity for recovery when given the chance." Raymond smiled, understanding she wasn't just talking about the fox. "So do people, given the right circumstances." Scout had recovered his energy and appointed himself guardian of their small colony, patrolling the perimeter of the plateau and occasionally barking at debris floating in the receding flood. It was Scout who first alerted them to the approaching rescue. His excited barking drew Raymond and Eleanor to the edge of their rocky shelter, where they could see a small boat making its way carefully through what remained of the floodwaters. Officer Mike Daniels stood at the bow, using a long pole to push away floating debris. "Ray, Dr. Whitfield, you folks all right up there?" Raymond waved. "We're fine, got a menagerie of patients with us." Mike guided the boat as close as possible to the base of the outcropping. "Rescue teams have been out since first light. The high school's set up as a shelter, and they've got an area for Dr. Whitfield's animals, too." The evacuation proceeded smoothly, with Raymond and Eleanor carefully transferring each animal down to the boat. Scouts supervised the entire operation, seeming to count each creature as it was moved to ensure no one was left behind. "That's quite a dog you've got there, Ray," Mike commented as Scout made a final inspection of their rocky shelter before joining them in the boat. "He found me, actually," Raymond corrected, exchanging a smile with Eleanor. "Just when I needed him most." As the boat pulled away from the outcropping, Raymond looked back at their unlikely sanctuary, a simple rock formation that had sheltered such an improbable family through the night. Eleanor's hand found his on the boat's gunwale, her fingers cold but her grip strong. "Thank you, Raymond," she said simply. Raymond covered her hand with his own. "We saved each other, I think." Scout pressed against their legs, his tail wagging slowly as they made their way through the changed landscape toward whatever new beginnings awaited. The flood that had threatened to wash away their separate lives had instead brought them together, a mechanic, a veterinarian, a stray dog, and a collection of wild creatures, all finding in each other exactly what they needed most. Not just rescue, but renewal. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.